An officer. Sarah was driving home late one night after visiting a friend. The roads were dark and empty when she noticed blue and red lights flashing behind her. Surprised, she checked her speed. She wasn't speeding. Unsure of what she'd done wrong, Sarah pulled over. The cop car behind her came to a stop, but the officer didn't approach immediately. After what felt like an eternity, the officer finally exited his vehicle. He was tall, with a pale complexion and cold, hollow eyes. His face seemed devoid of any emotion. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He asked for her license and registration in a flat, monotone voice, and she handed them over, her hands trembling. The officer took the documents and returned to his car, but minutes passed and he didn't return. Sarah's unease grew, and she glanced in her rearview mirror, but couldn't see anything. Suddenly, another knock on her window startled her. A different police officer stood there, concerned. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked. "I saw your car pulled over. Is something wrong?" Confused, Sarah explained that another officer had already taken her license and registration. The officer's expression turned serious. "Ma'am, I've been the only one on patrol here all night." Panic set in as Sarah realized the other officer wasn't who she thought. The real cop called for backup and they searched the area, but the strange cop car was gone, along with her documents. Weeks later, Sarah was contacted by the police. Her license and registration had been found near an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of town. Inside the cabin, authorities discovered evidence linked to multiple disappearances, all of which involved a mysterious cop pulling people over, never to be seen again. The cop at the door. One quiet Saturday night, Mark and his wife Emma were relaxing when they heard a knock at their door. Mark peered through the peephole and saw a police officer standing on their porch. The officer's face was partially hidden under the brim of his hat, and his expression was stern. "Good evening, sir. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Mind if I come in and ask you a few questions?" the officer asked. Mark hesitated but eventually opened the door. The officer stepped inside, and immediately the room felt colder. Emma joined them in the living room, her eyes nervously darting between the officer and her husband. The officer asked a few routine questions about the neighborhood, his tone detached and cold. Then he asked if he could check their basement. "Why the basement?" Mark asked, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. "There have been reports of break-ins through basements," the officer replied, his voice flat. Reluctantly, Mark led him downstairs while Emma stayed upstairs. The basement was dimly lit, with only a single flickering bulb casting shadows across the walls. The officer inspected the space silently, his gaze lingering on the corners. Suddenly, Mark's phone buzzed. It was a message from a neighbor, warning that a man impersonating a police officer had been spotted in the area and was considered dangerous. Mark's heart raced as he looked up, but the officer had vanished. Panicking, Mark rushed back upstairs, calling for Emma. He found her standing by the front door, shaken. "He just left," she whispered. "He said everything was fine." Mark ran outside, but the street was empty. The imposter had disappeared into the night. The next morning, they discovered a chilling message scratched into the basement wall.